All right, Mr. Duffy from the Starkville Civil War Arsenal is back with another chest that he just acquired. Tell us a little bit about this chest real quick.
Well, it's remarkable. I know if you possibly saw the last video we did, we restored a chest like this about a year ago, and we thought it would never happen again. And about a month ago, I got a call from a man in Vermont. He was out deer hunting about 40 years ago, found this chest out in the woods, thought it was too good to leave in the woods, dragged it home and was always going to restore it. And that was 43 years ago. And he saw Jay's video that Jay put out on the 160-year-old chest. He saw that video and decided that we would be the people to restore it. So he donated it to the Starkville Civil War Arsenal with the stipulation that we do restore it and preserve it, because it does need some help. It needs some cleaning. Obviously, it's really clean, so we're going to try and clean it, and then we're going to do some preservation work on it. But the goal is to make it complete and whole again, but not to change structurally. We're only going to put replacement parts that are missing. Things like this plate right here that is obviously gone.
Rusted away.
It's just rusted away. This should have a 90-degree bend that should fit up underneath there. Same way on the end, there's plates on the end. You can see that these went underneath. So we are going to replace those with exact reproduction, same specifications. So we are going to replace anything that's missing, but structurally, we're just trying to stabilize it and get it ready for the future generations again.
Let me squeeze through here real quick, and you can see the inside of the lid still has some, if not all, of the stenciling. There's some under here that actually the camera is doing a better job showing it up than it's actually showing in person, the HDR of the camera. So that actually doesn't show up that well in person. So we're going to clean up all of this, give the whole chest a cleaning. That's step number one. So Duffy's checking with a magnet to see what nail heads are original, because the original ones are not magnetic.
Copper.
They're copper. So there's a whole row that is magnetic, so they're not original. Little stuff like that needs to be removed.
Oh, I think
it's coming out. So there's no, well, it's hinged at the top, so hold on. I think we're glued right here, and I don't want this piece to break off.
Yeah.
Let's think about this. Turns out this panel is nailed right there. There's one nail through the rabbet, and we've got the magnet on the other nail. So literally in this state, it's just hanging on by those two nails. Now if we just pull it out, we risk damaging this and this fragile piece here. So I'm going to use an oscillating tool to cut into the wood down here and sever that nail, and then we'll pull the scab off after the fact. We got the bottom panel off, and we're doing some thinking about the the joinery here. So tongue and groove is known to be used, as well as a bunch of grooves with a spline in between, and we're thinking that that's most likely the case. So we initially thought that this was a lap joint, because just at first glance of the surviving other piece, so this was somewhere, right? We don't know exactly where, but it was somewhere. It's the only surviving piece, and we just looked at it and thought, well, that's a lap joint, right? But after further inspection, you can clearly see that the top is broken off on both sides. So that looks like a tongue groove, a tongue on both sides here. I'm sorry, a groove on both sides for a tongue and groove joint. A groove on both sides with the top side broken off. Well, after looking at this, my initial thought was, well, if that's a tongue, well, if that's a groove, then this is a tongue, because it looks like it right here. But the more we think about it, they used grooves and splines quite frequently, and if that's the case, this could have a groove, a spline glued into the groove. I'm getting tongue-tied here. A spline glued in, and then it was just broken off when the repair was made. So we're leaning towards that. And that also makes sense because as they're milling these up, you only need one plane to make a groove joint, where you need two planes to make a tongue and a groove. So it would be less tooling to make just a bunch of grooves and throw a spline in there. And that's what we think is going on. And this was somewhere.
I believe it's right there because that's just where the inlay
Ah, you're right.
for the corner end plate. So we pretty much know exactly where that one was.
Left or right, but that was a centerpiece. Yeah, it had to be a centerpiece. Because that's right, because it doesn't have the inlay for the strapping up here. So that's the remaining section of the center board.
Maybe more something like that.
That's interesting. Well, we cleaned this up a little bit, and there's a definite gunk groove right here and on the back side. And after a little bit of wiping the stuff away, that is without question a spline in a groove, not an integral tongue. Moment of truth, we got all of the screws out. Is it just stuck there? Yeah, all the screws are out, it's just stuck there. So let's see those dovetail joints. Wow, that whole corner just fell off.
Yep. I think it can be put back together though, believe it or not.
May be able to salvage that. But that's an interesting sight. What year do you think this is from? Say, range rather, 1840s to 50s?
The white 12-pounder came about in 1857 and they stopped making them in 1865.
You see on the top here, the dovetail stops because with the lid open, you can see that this is a mitered joint. And you're gonna spritz it real quick?
Just for the camera. Excuse me.
Oh, go ahead.
That's not what I expected. There.
So we just noticed that these things were built like tanks. So a big, massive, wide dovetail joint. Then it is reinforced with nails through every other tail to keep the tails in place opposite of the dovetail. And then it's wrapped with steel for the corner, or iron plate for the corner. That's what you do when you don't want something to move. Now my question is, are the nails there to simply stop or eliminate the step of adding glue? Did they just dry fit this, use nails, and then
Built a wooden box and then send it to the guys that ironed it. Put the irons on. So when they sent them the box, it was a very stable wooden box to handle, turn upside down, do whatever they wanted as they started placing all these irons on.
most of these screws holding the irons on had deteriorated enough that the holes needed some attention, whether it was the problem with the hole or the threads deteriorating, messing up the hole. They all needed attention. So to eliminate any issues installing the screws, all of the holes were plugged with dowels, and this will provide some solid material for every new screw to grab onto when the irons are finally installed. Next up, we started milling white oak for the bottom panels, and the original build specs for this, it's kind of interesting. It states that the case, the lid, and the center divider are all to be made from walnut. The removable dividers, the divider liners, and the tray were to be made from poplar, and then the bottom panel and the bolsters to be made from white oak. So we milled a spline joint for the two new boards and made a concession for the joint between the original and the new boards. So I was concerned with how accurate I could cut the spline on the original bottom board with some stuff kind of in the way, and that, as well as kind of removing too much material and making that joint brittle because that board is so old. So here's what we did. We opted for using biscuits to help with the alignment and then to glue the center board to the original. It's not 100% accurate, but we thought it was kind of the best solution for preserving the last remaining piece of the bottom panel. So we glued the middle board to the original board, inserted the spline, and then glued the outside board into the rabbet, and then put some weight on it to kind of let it dry for a few days. But Duffy's going to go back and nail along the entire perimeter according to the specs in the original contracts. The next day of work started with the new and the refurbished plates. I think only one of these was a replacement. The others were just cleaned up and then patched as needed with a TIG welder. These are inset into the bottom panel, so the profile was traced, and then the bulk of the waste was removed with a router and then finished off with chisels until all the pieces fit like they were supposed to. At this point, we were able to flip the chest over to work on the top. So the top structure, it's basically a walnut frame and panel with a domed profile to shed the water, which is pretty interesting. The lid is then covered in copper, and as you can see, this copper has definitely seen better days. However, the back corners are in perfect shape, and there's some folding that went on to get it to wrap around the corners. It would be a shame to not let that example of craftsmanship live on. So the idea here was to very carefully remove all of the copper nails, and then the entire copper top was pulled off so we could clean underneath it. Duffy would later decide on what to do with the front of that copper. Under the copper, we found all kinds of junk. We found some copper nails, we found some modern steel nails, which obviously don't belong, we found some old cut nails, but mostly a bunch of metal BBs. Now, we initially thought that this was from like a shotgun, considering how many there were, but also considering that we didn't find any through holes in the copper, just indentions. My guess is that kids used it for target practice with a BB gun, while it spent part of its life outside in the woods. Next up are the removable dividers, and the specs called for these to be made from a solid piece of poplar. If I recall correctly, they were about 11 inches wide, so Duffy brought a pretty huge piece of poplar for this. The extra that I cut off happened to be perfect for the tray that I'll build in just a little bit. All of these panels were milled to their final size, and we also cut the divider liner pieces. These will be nailed to the inside of the case, and a pair on either side will locate the divider and then allow it to slide in and out of the case. And the tips of these, they look kind of rough right now, but they'll all be rounded over by hand. These and the dividers were wrapped and then set aside for Duffy to install at his place. While we're talking about the poplar, I did use the offcuts to make a tray, and I made a separate video on making this tray. I'm not sure exactly what day it was that I made this, or if it fits in this order of the video, but I made a separate video on this tray, and one of the interesting things about the tray is there was a center hole in the bottom of the tray, and that was kind of interesting. Is what's the reasoning behind that? While I made the video and while I made the tray, at that time I did not know the reasoning for it, and I just guessed that it's probably due to something like the piston fit. If you make a box with a very, very tight fitting tray and you set it on top, it'll slowly fall down on an air cushion, and as woodworkers, it's just a good sign of a precise fit. Well, you don't want that in a functional piece like this where you're in battle basically. So I think that the center hole, or I thought that the center hole was to prevent a piston fit, and I did end up finding some documentation to confirm that. 45-degree bolster blocks are also needed between the dividers to help locate the ammunition, and we milled these to size, just nothing major, just a 45-degree block of white oak, and then drilled some counterbore holes for the installation. Again, these were set aside for Duffy to install at his place. All of the poplar dividers are removable, but there is one walnut divider that is placed directly in the middle, and it is not removable. It fits into a dado in the front and back of the case and will later be bolted in place. This was a pretty large board, both in width and thickness, and I really did not want to cut it too small, so I took my time milling it down, and I used a scrap piece of MDF to really help determine the exact fit. Back to the lid for some repair work on the lid frame, And like I said, it's a frame and panel, so you basically have a rail and style cabinet door, right? In this case, the front and back pieces are the ones that extend all the way, so they're the ones that have the end grain exposed. The lid also has an interior rabbet all the way around where the stencil panel is nailed to, and that rabbet results in kind of a high area near the end grain where the wood can very easily chip off. This is the second of these chests that I've worked on with Duffy, and both of them required this area to be repaired. The solution is to square up the chipped area so a block of walnut can first be glued into place and then trimmed flush with the rest of the lid. Both of the front corners of the chest needed this to be patched. The last little bit of work in my shop was to drill the hole for the through bolt in the center walnut panel. So what we have here is a 20-something inch long, half-inch diameter bolt that needs to go all the way through the chest and through the 1-inch thick center divider. For this, I picked up an 18-inch long, 9/16 of an inch auger bit. This is a Wood Owl auger bit, which will allow us to drill halfway through from either side. This was stressful, to say the least. The only guides we had here were the original holes to start the bit. So as far as tracking left or right, that's pretty easy for me to do. I'm the one holding the drill, so I can visually look at it and tell if I need to go left or right to maintain, in alignment with that center divider. For the vertical alignment, I don't really know because I can't really tell how high I am in comparison to the top of the center divider. So I had Duffy stand back at a distance so he could look at both the drill bit as well as the top of the panel and let me know if I needed to go up or down a little bit to keep it tracking parallel with the panel top. Again, this was just nerve-wracking, but in the end we were able to get it done. Finally, the bolt can be installed, and for that some lubrication was shot into the hole. I forget exactly what we used, but it sure couldn't hurt at this point. And the half-inch bolt was driven all the way through the entire chest. This is pretty interesting the way that this works. The front of the bolt contains the latch for the lid, and then the back of the bolt is secured with just a washer and a square nut. And with that work done, the work in my shop was done. Everything else was taken to Duffy's house to be completed as time allowed.
Hallelujah!
That was stressful.
I think it's going to be just fine, Joe.
And here we are back at Duffy's Museum. Before we talk about the restoration of the rest of this video, I want to reference this 24-pound howitzer chest that we worked on last time. I've got a video you can check out for that, as well as firing this sweet gum mortar in both daytime and nighttime. Pretty cool stuff. So this is the completed chest. Duffy did all the rest of the work here in his shop. There's one thing that I want to reference before we begin, and that is this this sticker or paper that was supposed to be put on the very bottom. I don't know if you can see that. It says this sheet is to be glued on the inside of the limber chest cover, but you didn't want to put that on there, did you?
No, just couldn't cover up all that beautiful old wood.
Well, let's open it up and see the inside. So we'll talk about the lid and all that in just a second, but on the inside we have this stencil that really cleaned up quite nice. It wasn't this visible. All the little stenciling was not this visible when we first got it. That's basically all you did to the inside cover right here, right? And removed the nails and such that weren't there. The repair job on both inside corners blends really, really well, so that's pretty cool. The tray, he's aged it a little bit, and it's very interesting. Of course, you can't really show it too much on camera, but when you open that up and then put it back in there, the center air hole, you can feel it on your face. Air just being rushed right back into you. But anyway, that's the reasoning for the hole. On this side, we have the dividers, and these were called liners. Is that what those?
Yes. These two are the original.
Okay.
And then everything else has been replaced or remade. And this is the one original partition. Everything else has been replaced.
So original, replace, replace, and then original liners, and then replace, replace. So you can see the originals had that kind of rounded taper and some of them are rounded, some of them are straight, and we try to replicate that with these over here. Let's take the tray out, which is a little snug fit. And those blocks on the bottom, those 45-degree blocks, those were the bolster blocks that we referenced earlier. And all of these dividers, these partitions, they all slide out. Of course, the center walnut that we put that bolt all the way through, that was a little bit stressful, like we mentioned. But you kind of can't tell that some of these pieces are replaced. Now, lighting is not great, but the far... You know what, Duffy? I can't even tell which one's the original bottom panel. Which one is it, front or the back?
Let me think for a second.
I guess that's a good. It's got to be this one. This has got to be the original.
It's that one. That's the original.
Okay, so in this orientation, the right one is the original panel, and the middle and left are the replacement. But aged a little bit visually, and it all looks like it was supposed to. Now, one thing that's pretty interesting is, let me get out of the light here. These bolsters are secured to the dividers, so they come up with it, which means that this one, you couldn't have the holes in the same location. Of course, you could offset them, but the contract specified that one of these was secured through this side, and the other one secured through this side as well. So the screws that were used to hold this on are hidden behind this bolster as well. I'm not sure if it really... you think they did that to reduce the amount of metal exposed?
Possibly. Or it was just easier to put them in there than to work at that crazy 45-degree angle. So...
Oh, I gotta put that all the way in. All right, well, let's close it, pull it away from the wall a little bit, and we'll get around to the perimeter of it. One thing to note here is this board was one of the replacement bottom panels when Duffy received the chest. So this was not to original specs, but it did spend quite a bit of its life in the chest, so we wanted to keep it with the chest. So all I did was just carve a sign out of it, and that's one way to keep this piece with the chest. So we have it sitting on a crate here. We can walk around it. And on the front, you may remember that there was a bunch of damage up here, and we contemplated leaving it completely original, having that damage shown and all that, or just filling it in, and obviously Duffy went with filling it in. This is somewhat the same green color. Now, what was the specs for as far as green color? Did they have any specific green?
It was called olive drab, but all I did was match the inside cover.
Yeah.
So that's matched to the inside lid, which is the original paint.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of interpretation, but, you know, what do? You can't match paint that's 100 and 200 years old, whatever it was. Here's one side over here. And again, you can see the original craftsmanship on these corners is preserved. So that was the original fold. He was able to get it all put back together. And I think the other side's a little bit better. Irons look nice on this side. Did you end up filling the slots of the screws?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So the originals, these slots of the screws were filled with white lead, and they're filled as they're put back in. This is the back side of that bolt that we put all the way through. So I was mistaken. I said that this was a washer and a square nut. The iron here acts as a washer, and then it's just a square nut on top of that. And if I'm not mistaken, this corner, this original corner, looks really good if I can get this to focus here. So that's all original craftsmanship. And it's really cool to be able to preserve that. Now, My question is, how were you going to preserve the top, the original copper, with so much damage to it? So just explain here what exactly you did to preserve that.
Well, we had a couple different options and we went with the simplest one. We simply took a piece of copper, same gauge, and slipped it up underneath, bent the corners to match, and then just overlapped the original copper over the top. We had thought about cutting it off and then getting a nice clean butt joint. We could have soldered it and then ground it down, but the more and more I looked at it, and the more and more Jay and I looked at it, this was 1860s copper, and we wanted to preserve every bit of it. I used about 95% of the original nails that came out. I sat there with a little ball peen hammer and a little anvil and straightened them out. I spent about a day straightening out over 200 copper nails, but I just thought it was important to put those nails back in there. So all the nails that came out all went back in.
That's cool.
And then the copper obviously was colorized, or I aged it with a couple of different chemicals, just to get rid of that brand new look.
Well, that's cool. It's done, and it is now on display in your museum. So if you guys are interested in actually checking out the rest of this museum, there's quite a few gems in this place, and this is just one small room of many here. So if you're interested, you can go to his website, starkvilleCivilWarArsenal.com, and you can find his contact info, contact Mr. Duffy, and maybe set up an appointment to check all this stuff out. That's it for this video. You guys take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.